In a city where champions are forged and respect is earned with blood and sweat, one man remains invisible. Jeremiah, the quiet janitor of a bustling boxing gym, sweeps the floors and fades into the background, his eyes reflecting stories untold. But beneath his humble exterior lies a past that even legends would envy. When an arrogant coach pushes him too far, mocking his silence and underestimating his presence, the stage is set for an awakening that no one saw coming. As tensions rise, the line between humility and strength blurs, and the gym is about to witness a revelation that will shake its very foundations. Who is this man who endures ridicule with a knowing gaze? What secrets are etched into the scars hidden beneath his worn-out hoodie? As the gloves come off and the truth steps into the ring, everyone will learn that true power doesn't need to boast, it simply waits for the right moment. Prepare yourself for the silent struggle, a story where the quietest person in the room holds the mightiest legacy. When the past and present collide, will arrogance stand a chance against experience? Dive into a tale of respect, redemption, and the unstoppable force of a legend reborn. Are you ready to witness what happens when the janitor decides it's time to fight back? The boxing gym was always alive with energy. The sound of gloves striking heavy bags echoed off the concrete walls, while the sharp, rhythmic breathing of fighters mixed with the scent of sweat and old leather. Posters of past champions lined the walls, their eyes frozen in moments of victory, watching over the next generation of hopefuls. Here, respect was earned through hard work, and the bruises accumulated in the ring. It was in this environment that Jeremiah Carter worked every day, though not as one of the fighters. At least not anymore. To the casual observer, he was just the janitor sweeping the floor after hours, mopping up sweat, making sure everything was in order before locking up. He arrived early in the morning before the gym came to life and stayed late once everyone else had gone home. Quiet, diligent, and invisible to most, Jeremiah had settled into this role without complaint. At first glance, Jeremiah was an unassuming man. He wore plain clothes, usually a faded hoodie and worn-out sneakers, and his hands, once so powerful, now worked a mop or a broom. He kept to himself, never stepping into the spotlight, always on the periphery. The younger boxers hardly noticed him. To them, he was just part of the background like the punching bags or the benches. Some even wondered why someone like him worked in a place like this. He didn't seem like he belonged among the loud grunts and intense sparring matches. Yet there he was day after day. In contrast, Marcelo, one of the head trainers, was as loud as Jeremiah was quiet. Marcelo was a man who thrived on attention. A former amateur boxer turned coach, he loved the recognition that came with his position. His voice often boomed across the gym, shouting instructions, cracking jokes, and keeping the place buzzing with his larger-than-life personality. Marcelo loved to be seen, to be respected, and while he was good at his job, there was a layer of arrogance that everyone in the gym had come to accept as part of the package. It was an unspoken rule in the gym that everyone deferred to Marcelo. The students, some of them just kids and other seasoned fighters, all looked up to him. His approval mattered, and his jokes, often made at someone else's expense, were accepted without question. For Marcelo, mocking the younger boxers or poking fun at someone's mistakes was all part of the gym's tough love culture. Lately, however, his jabs had found a new target. Jeremiah. Marcelo seemed to enjoy taunting the janitor, making light of his quiet demeanor and older appearance. It had started small, offhand remarks about Jeremiah's age, his slow movements as he cleaned the gym, or his lack of ambition. But as time went on, Marcelo's jabs grew bolder, especially when there was an audience. The other fighters would laugh, more out of respect for Marcelo than genuine amusement. "Hey, Jeremiah," Marcelo called one day, loud enough for everyone in the gym to hear. "When are you going to get in the ring and show these guys how to mop the floor with their opponents?" The group of trainees nearby chuckled, looking to see if Jeremiah would respond. As usual, he didn't. He simply kept sweeping the floor, his face impassive. It was as if he hadn't heard a word. Marcelo wasn't satisfied with the lack of reaction. "Come on, old man," he continued. "You've been hanging around this gym for years. You ever think about doing something other than sweeping? Maybe step into the ring for real?" Jeremiah paused for a moment, leaning on the handle of his broom. He looked up, his eyes calm, unbothered. "I'm happy where I am," he said quietly before resuming his work. The answer, simple and measured, seemed to annoy Marcelo even more. He grinned, turning to his group of students. "See that? He's happy, just sweeping up after us. Some people don't have the fire, I guess." Laughter rippled through the gym, and Jeremiah finished his task without another word. It wasn't the first time Marcelo had mocked him, and it wouldn't be the last. Jeremiah knew how to keep his head down. He wasn't interested in proving anything to anyone, especially not Marcelo. But Marcelo's arrogance was infectious, and soon enough, other members of the gym started joining in, mimicking his taunts. Jeremiah, once simply ignored, was now the subject of jokes. They were never cruel enough to be considered bullying outright, but they were sharp enough to make sure he knew his place, as nothing more than a janitor. Still, Jeremiah never showed any sign of being affected. He moved with a steady, deliberate pace, continuing his work with quiet dignity. To him, the gym was more than just a place of sweat and noise. It held memories that none of these young boxers or trainers knew. It had been his sanctuary once, a place where he had been someone else entirely. But that was a long time ago. Now, Jeremiah found solace in the rhythm of his routine, cleaning the mats, replacing the gloves, preparing the gym for another day of training. It was a far cry from the life he had once lived, but it was a choice he had made, a path he had walked willingly. If the others only knew who he really was, they might have treated him differently. But Jeremiah didn't need their recognition. Not anymore. Yet as the days passed, Marcelo's taunts began to draw more attention. His mockery grew louder, and more people started paying attention, including Lucas, the gym's owner. Lucas was older, a former fighter himself, and he knew more about Jeremiah than most. He had always respected Jeremiah's decision to stay in shadows. But lately, Lucas had been watching the growing tension between Marcelo and the janitor with unease. One evening, after most of the fighters had gone, Lucas approached Jeremiah as he was cleaning up. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly, his tone concerned. Jeremiah looked up, giving Lucas a small nod. "I'm fine, just doing my job." Lucas hesitated. "You know, you don't have to take that from Marcelo. He doesn't know what he's talking about." Jeremiah smiled faintly, wiping down one of the punching bags. "It's all right, Lucas. Let him say what he wants. Words don't hurt me." Lucas sighed but didn't press the matter. He knew Jeremiah too well to argue. Still, something told him that the situation with Marcelo was heading toward a boiling point. And when it finally reached that point, Lucas wasn't sure what would happen. Jeremiah, however, remained calm. He had been in far worse situations before, and if Marcelo thought he was going to break his spirit, he was sorely mistaken. The sun cast long beams of light through the high windows of the gym as Jeremiah finished mopping the last section of the floor. The chatter of the morning crowd had faded, leaving a quiet that settled over the place like a comforting blanket. He leaned the mop against the wall and took a moment to catch his breath, his eyes drifting over the familiar surroundings. The gym held a special place in Jeremiah's heart. It wasn't just a building filled with punching bags and boxing rings. It was a repository of memories. Years ago, this very place had echoed with cheers chanting his name. Back then, he wasn't the janitor sweeping the floors. He was Jeremiah, the Hurricane Carter, a force to be reckoned with in the boxing world. His mind wandered back to those days, to the adrenaline rush of stepping into the ring under the glaring lights, the roar of the crowd filling his ears. He remembered the weight of the gloves, the smell of sweat and blood, the intense focus that drowned out everything but his opponent. He had climbed the ranks swiftly, his natural talent and relentless work ethic propelling him to become a world champion. The title fights, the interviews, the fame, it had all been part of a life that seemed almost unreal now. But with glory came pressure. The constant demands from promoters, the invasive media scrutiny, the endless training camps, it all took its toll. After a particularly grueling title defense that left him both physically and emotionally drained, Jeremiah had made the difficult decision to step away from professional boxing. He sought peace and anonymity, longing for a simpler life where he could reconnect with himself away from the spotlight. Returning to his hometown, he found solace in the familiar streets and eventually in the gym where he had first learned to throw a punch. Taking the job as a janitor wasn't a step down in his eyes. It was a way to stay connected to the sport he loved without the chaos that had consumed his life. He could be close to the ring without having to step into it. Jeremiah was pulled from his thoughts by the sound of the gym doors swinging open. The afternoon crowd was starting to filter in, young boxers eager to train, full of dreams and ambition. Among them was Marcelo, striding in with his usual air of confidence. His laughter boomed as he chatted with a group of students, his presence commanding attention. As Jeremiah began to organize the equipment along the wall, he noticed Marcelo casting a glance in his direction. There was a hint of mischief in the trainer's eyes. Marcelo sauntered over, his entourage of students following like ducklings. "Well, if it isn't our dedicated custodian, always keeping the place spotless," Marcelo said with a smirk. "Tell me, Jeremiah, do you ever get tired of cleaning up other people's messes?" Jeremiah met his gaze calmly. "Someone has to keep things in order," he replied evenly. Marcelo chuckled, looking around at his students who snickered on cue. "I suppose you're right. Everyone has their role to play. Though, I can't help but wonder, being around all these athletes every day, does it ever make you wish you had stepped into the ring yourself?" A couple of the students exchanged glances, sensing the taunt in Marcelo's words. Jeremiah simply shrugged. "I'm content where I am." Marcelo raised an eyebrow. "Content? That's a word people use when they've given up on reaching higher." There it was, the not-so-subtle jab. Jeremiah felt a flicker of annoyance, but kept his composure. "Not everyone measures success the same way," he said quietly before turning back to his work. Unwilling to let it go, Marcelo pressed on. "Maybe you should give it a try sometime. Who knows, maybe you've got a hidden talent." The students laughed, though some of them did so uncomfortably. One of the younger boxers, Derek, watched the exchange with a furrowed brow. He admired Marcelo's skill as a trainer but wasn't fond of his tendency to belittle others. Derek had noticed Jeremiah's unassuming nature and the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. Something about the janitor intrigued him. Later that day, as Jeremiah stepped outside for a brief break, Derek approached him. "Hey, Jeremiah," he began hesitantly. Jeremiah looked up, a hint of surprise in his eyes. Few of the boxers ever spoke to him directly. "Hello, Derek, isn't it?" "Yeah," Derek replied, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I just wanted to say, you handle Marcelo's comments pretty well. He can be a bit much." Jeremiah offered a faint smile. "He's passionate about what he does." Derek chuckled. "That's a polite way to put it. I guess I just don't see the point in putting others down. Everyone has their own battles," Jeremiah said thoughtfully. "Sometimes people project their insecurities onto others." Derek considered this, nodding slowly. "You sound like you've been around the block a few times." Jeremiah shrugged. "I've seen a bit of the world." Before they could continue, Marcelo's voice cut through the air. "Derek, break's over. Let's get back to work." "Dia excite. Guess I better get back. See you around, Jeremiah." As Derek jogged back inside, Jeremiah watched him go, feeling a glimmer of hope. Perhaps not everyone in the gym was as blind as they seemed. Inside, Marcelo was ramping up his training session, pushing his students harder. Yet despite his focus on the class, he couldn't shake a growing irritation. There was something about Jeremiah's calm demeanor that got under his skin. The janitor's refusal to be rattled by his taunts felt like a challenge, one that Marcelo was increasingly determined to win. Over the next few days, Marcelo escalated his efforts. He began making snide remarks within earshot of larger groups, questioning Jeremiah's work ethic, mocking his age, and even implying that he was a burden to the gym. Some of the students laughed along uncomfortably, while others started to feel uneasy about the trainer's behavior. One evening, as Jeremiah was stacking weights in the corner, Marcelo called out loudly, "Careful with those weights, old man. Wouldn't want you throwing out your back. Maybe we should get you a desk job instead." A few students chuckled, but the laughter was sparse. The atmosphere was shifting, and even those who once found Marcelo's jokes amusing were beginning to see them as mean-spirited. Jeremiah paused, taking a deep breath before continuing his task. He reminded himself that reacting would only feed Marcelo's ego, but internally he felt the stirrings of a conflict he had hoped to avoid. He had left the world of competition behind for a reason, seeking peace and anonymity. Yet, here he was, being pushed toward a confrontation he didn't want. That night, as he closed up the gym, Jeremiah lingered in the silence. He walked over to one of the heavy bags, his fingers tracing the worn leather. Memories flooded back. Hours spent training, perfecting his technique, the discipline and dedication that had defined his youth. He hadn't thrown a punch in years, but his body remembered. The muscle memory was there, dormant, but not forgotten. He threw a slow jab, feeling the weight shift under his feet, the familiar alignment of his shoulders and hips. It felt natural, like slipping into a well-worn glove. "Still got it," came a voice from behind. Jeremiah turned to see Lucas leaning against the doorway. "Just tidying up," Jeremiah said, his tone guarded. Lucas gave him a knowing look. "You don't have to hide who you are, you know." Jeremiah sighed. "I'm not hiding, just choosing a different path. Sometimes paths choose us," Lucas replied. "Marcelo is pushing you. I can see it's getting to you." "It's fine," Jeremiah insisted. "I don't need to prove anything." Lucas nodded slowly. "I understand, but remember, there's strength in standing up for yourself, not out of pride, but out of self-respect." Jeremiah didn't respond immediately. He appreciated Lucas's concern, but he wasn't sure confronting Marcelo was the answer. "I'll think about it," he finally said. As Lucas left, Jeremiah sat down on one of the benches, lost in thought. The gym was dark now, the only light coming from a flickering bulb near the entrance. The shadows danced across the ring, and for a moment he imagined himself back in his prime, the crowd cheering, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. But those days were over, weren't they? The tension with Marcelo was reaching a tipping point. Jeremiah could feel it, and so could others. The question was not if, but when. And deep down, Jeremiah knew that he might soon have to face a choice. Continue to turn the other cheek or step back into the ring to teach a lesson, not just to Marcelo, but perhaps to himself as well. He stood up, grabbing his jacket and turning off the lights. As he locked up and stepped out into the cool night air, Jeremiah looked back at the gym one last time. The path he had chosen was about to intersect with the one he had left behind, and fate seemed determined to bring him to that crossroads. The next morning, the gym buzzed with its usual energy. The rhythmic sounds of jump ropes snapping against the floor and gloves hitting punching bags created a familiar symphony. Jeremiah arrived early as always, quietly setting up equipment and making sure everything was in order before the fighters began their routines. As the day progressed, the tension that had been building seemed to reach a new peak. Marcelo was in rare form, pushing his students harder than usual, his voice carrying a sharp edge. He barked orders, corrected techniques with an impatient snap, and his usual jokes carried an undercurrent of irritation. Jeremiah noticed, but kept to his tasks. He could feel the eyes of some of the younger boxers following him, whispers trailing in his wake. Word had gotten around about the increasing hostility between Marcelo and the janitor. Speculation was rampant, and the air was thick with unspoken questions. Around midday, the gym was packed. It was the busiest time, with fighters of all levels training side by side. Marcelo decided it was the perfect moment to make his move. "All right, everyone gather around," he shouted, clapping his hands loudly. The chatter died down as fighters wiped their brows and moved closer, forming a loose circle around the main ring. Marcelo climbed between the ropes, his presence commanding attention. Jeremiah, stacking towels near the wall, glanced over but didn't approach. He preferred to stay on the sidelines, but today, fate had other plans. Marcelo scanned the crowd, his gaze settling on Jeremiah. "Hey, Jeremiah," he called out, his voice echoing through the gym. "Why don't you come over here for a second?" A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned toward the janitor. Jeremiah hesitated, his instincts telling him to avoid whatever trap Marcelo was setting. But with everyone watching, he couldn't simply ignore the call. He walked over calmly, stopping at the edge of the ring. "What can I do for you?" he asked evenly. Marcelo leaned on the ropes, a sly grin spreading across his face. "I've been thinking. You've been around this gym for a long time, always watching but never participating. Maybe it's time you showed us what you've learned. How about you step into the ring and give these kids a demonstration?" A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Some of the fighters exchanged amused glances, while others looked uncomfortable. Derek stood at the back, his jaw tightening as he sensed where this was heading. Jeremiah met Marcelo's gaze steadily. "I'm just here to do my job," he replied. "I don't think that's necessary." Marcelo's grin widened. "Come on, don't be shy. Unless, of course, you're afraid. Maybe all that time watching hasn't amounted to much after all." A few chuckles erupted, but they were subdued. The mood in the gym was shifting from casual to tense. Lucas, who had been observing from his office window, stepped out and began making his way toward the ring, concern etched on his face. Jeremiah took a deep breath. "I have no interest in causing a scene," he said quietly. Marcelo's eyes flashed with triumph. "No scene at all, just a friendly spar. Or are you admitting that you can't handle it?" The challenge hung heavy in the air. Jeremiah knew that no matter how he responded, Marcelo wouldn't let it go. Avoiding the confrontation would only embolden the trainer further, and the disrespect would continue. Before he could answer, Derek stepped forward. "Coach, maybe we should just get back to training. This doesn't seem necessary." Marcelo shot him a sharp look. "Stay out of this, Derek. I'm giving our friend here an opportunity to step up." Jeremiah looked around. The faces staring back at him were a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. He felt a resolve harden within him. Perhaps it was time to put an end to this. "All right," Jeremiah said softly, but his voice carried. "If you insist." A wave of surprise rippled through the crowd. Marcelo seemed momentarily taken aback, but quickly recovered. "Excellent," he exclaimed. "Let's get you some gloves." "I have my own," Jeremiah replied. Marcelo raised an eyebrow but shrugged it off. "Suit yourself." Jeremiah walked over to a locker in the corner of the gym. It was old and unmarked, one that few people ever used. From it, he pulled out a pair of well-worn boxing gloves. They were classic, leather-faded but well-maintained. As he slipped them on, those nearby noticed the ease and familiarity with which he moved. Returning to the ring, Jeremiah climbed through the ropes with a grace that belied his years. Marcelo bounced on his toes, throwing a few shadow punches to warm up, playing to the audience. "Let's keep it light," Marcelo said, winking at the crowd. "Wouldn't want anyone getting hurt." Jeremiah nodded, his expression unreadable. Lucas reached the edge of the ring, his eyes meeting Jeremiah's. He gave a subtle nod, a silent message of support. The crowd gathered closer, forming a tight circle around the ring. The usual gym noises faded away, replaced by a tense silence. Even the ambient sounds of the city outside seemed distant. Marcelo moved to the center of the ring, gloves up, a confident smirk on his face. Jeremiah mirrored him, his stance relaxed but poised. For a moment, time seemed to slow as the two men faced each other. "Ready when you are," Marcelo taunted. Jeremiah didn't respond. He simply waited. Marcelo threw the first punch, a quick jab intended to test the waters. Jeremiah dodged it effortlessly, barely shifting his weight. Marcelo's eyes narrowed slightly, and he launched another jab, followed by a cross. Again, Jeremiah evaded the blows with minimal movement. A few spectators murmured in surprise. Marcelo, feeling the sting of being shown up, pressed forward with more force. He unleashed a combination of punches, faster and more aggressive. Jeremiah blocked and slipped each one with precision, his movements smooth and economical. "Come on, fight back!" Marcelo growled, frustration creeping into his voice. Jeremiah finally threw a punch, a swift jab that connected lightly with Marcelo's shoulder, just enough to unbalance him. Marcelo stumbled back a step, his expression shifting from confidence to irritation. The crowd sensed a change. Whispers spread among the fighters. "Did you see that? He's barely trying. Who is this guy?" Marcelo charged again, this time with real intent. He aimed a powerful hook at Jeremiah's torso, but Jeremiah sidestepped, causing Marcelo to miss wildly and nearly lose his footing. Seizing the moment, Jeremiah tapped Marcelo's side with a quick succession of light punches, demonstrating control, without causing harm. Anger flared in Marcelo's eyes. "Stop playing around," he shouted. Jeremiah met his gaze. "I'm not the one playing." Enraged, Marcelo threw caution aside and attacked with everything he had. His punches were wild, lacking the technique he usually prided himself on. Jeremiah weaved through them as if dancing, his movements fluid and effortless. The spectators watched in awe. It was becoming clear that the janitor possessed skills far beyond what anyone had imagined. From the back of the crowd, a voice called out, "Wait a minute! I recognize him." All eyes turned to Ethan, one of the older boxers who had been absent for a while. "That's Jeremiah Carter, the Hurricane. He was a world champion years ago." Gasps rippled through the gym. Murmurs turned into exclamations. "No way! Are you serious? I thought he disappeared." Marcelo froze, his fists lowered slightly. "What are they talking about?" he demanded. Jeremiah sighed softly. The secret he had kept for so long was out. There was no point in denying it now. "It's true," he admitted. "I used to box." Marcelo's face twisted with a mix of disbelief and embarrassment. "You're that Jeremiah Carter?" Jeremiah nodded. The realization hit Marcelo hard. The crowd's eyes shifted between the two men, waiting to see what would happen next. Swallowing his pride, Marcelo tried to regain control. "It doesn't matter who you were. You're nothing now." He lunged forward again, but his aggression was met with firm resistance. This time, Jeremiah didn't just dodge, he countered. With a swift combination, he tapped Marcelo's gloves aside and delivered a light but precise punch to his chest, stopping him in his tracks. "Enough," Jeremiah said firmly. Marcelo staggered back, breathing heavily. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a mix of humiliation and fatigue. The gym was silent. Everyone waited, unsure of what would happen next. Jeremiah lowered his gloves. "There's no need to continue this. Let's put it behind us." Marcelo's shoulders slumped. He looked around at the faces of his students, some sympathetic, others disappointed. His bravado had crumbled, and with it his authority. Lucas stepped forward, breaking the silence. "All right, that's enough for today. Everyone, back to your training." Gradually, the crowd dispersed, though the atmosphere remained charged. Conversations buzzed as fighters returned to their routines, stealing glances at Jeremiah and Marcelo. Jeremiah began to remove his gloves, his expression thoughtful. Derek approached him cautiously. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" Jeremiah offered a faint smile. "I didn't think it mattered. I'm not that person anymore." "But you still have so much to offer," Derek insisted. "Perhaps," Jeremiah replied. "But sometimes it's not about what we can do, but what we choose to do." Marcelo remained in the ring, sitting on one of the stools with his head down. His defeat was not just physical, but deeply personal. Jeremiah walked over to him. "Marcelo," he began gently. The trainer looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and shame. "What do you want?" "I want to put this behind us," Jeremiah said. "There's no need for animosity." Marcelo scoffed. "Easy for you to say. You made a fool out of me. That was never my intention. But respect goes both ways." Marcelo hesitated, then sighed heavily. "I suppose I've been out of line." Jeremiah extended his hand. "We can start fresh." After a moment, Marcelo shook his hand. "All right, fresh start." As they parted ways, a subtle shift occurred within the gym. The unspoken hierarchy had been challenged, and with it came the possibility of change. Respect was no longer demanded through arrogance, but could be earned through humility and understanding. Jeremiah returned to his duties, but now he was greeted with nods and small smiles. The fighters looked at him differently, not just as the janitor, but as someone worthy of their respect, and perhaps even their admiration. The day's events had set things in motion that could not be undone. For Jeremiah, the path forward was uncertain, but he felt a sense of relief. The secret was out, and with it, a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the gym windows, Jeremiah couldn't help but feel that this was not an ending but a new beginning, for him, for Marcelo, and for everyone who had witnessed what true strength and humility looked like. The atmosphere in the gym had shifted dramatically after the unexpected sparring match. Whispers filled the space where the sounds of punching bags and jump ropes usually dominated. Fighters huddled in small groups, exchanging astonished glances and murmured conversations. The revelation of Jeremiah's true identity had sent shockwaves through everyone present. Jeremiah stood near the edge of the ring, quietly wrapping up his gloves. His movements were steady, unhurried, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But the glances cast his way told a different story. Respect, curiosity, and a hint of awe reflected in the eyes of those who had just witnessed the display of skill from the man they thought they knew. Derek approached him cautiously. "Jeremiah, that was incredible," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone who you are?" Jeremiah offered a gentle smile. "Because who I was isn't as important as who I am now," he replied. "I've found peace in the life I've chosen." "But you could teach us so much," Derek insisted. "Your experience, your knowledge. We could all learn from you." Before Jeremiah could respond, Lucas joined them. "He's right, the gym owner said, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and concern. "You've got a gift, Jeremiah. It's a shame to keep it hidden." Jeremiah sighed softly. "I appreciate that, but my time in the spotlight ended long ago. I'm content to let the new generation make their mark." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "I understand wanting a simple life, but sometimes our paths have a way of finding us, even when we try to leave them behind." Marcelo remained on the other side of the gym, nursing his bruised ego more than any physical injury. He watched as fighters gravitated toward Jeremiah, their respect for him evident. Bitterness gnawed at him, but beneath it was a seed of self-doubt that he couldn't ignore. As the afternoon wore on, the usual rhythm of the gym resumed, though the energy was undeniably different. Jeremiah returned to his duties, but now, instead of being invisible, he was approached by several fighters seeking advice or simply wanting to express their amazement. "Mr. Carter, can you show me that move you used earlier?" one young boxer asked eagerly. Jeremiah hesitated. "I don't know if that's appropriate," he began. Lucas stepped in. "Jeremiah, perhaps you could help with some training sessions? Just once in a while?" The gym fell silent as everyone awaited his response. Jeremiah looked around at the hopeful faces. He felt a tug at his heart, a familiar pull he hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a balance between his desire for a quiet life and the opportunity to make a positive impact. "All right," he agreed softly. "I can help out here and there." A cheer went up among the fighters. Even those who hadn't interacted much with Jeremiah seemed excited at the prospect of learning from a former champion. Marcelo watched from a distance, his jaw tight. The gym that had once been his domain was shifting, and he felt control slipping through his fingers. Later that evening, as the gym began to empty, Marcelo approached Lucas in his office. "Got a minute?" he asked tersely. Lucas looked up from his paperwork. "Sure, Marcelo. What's on your mind?" Marcelo closed the door behind him. "I want to talk about Jeremiah." Lucas leaned back in his chair. "What about him? Don't you think it's a bit inappropriate for him to just take over training like that?" Marcelo challenged. "He's been hiding who he is, and now suddenly he's the star of the gym?" Lucas regarded him calmly. "He's not taking over anything. He's agreed to help train the fighters because they ask him to. There's plenty of room for both of you." Marcelo scoffed. "You don't see what's happening. They're all flocking to him, forgetting everything I've done for them." "Marcelo, this isn't a competition," Lucas replied gently. "The gym thrives when we all contribute our strengths. You've been a good trainer, but there's always room to learn and grow." "Maybe for them," Marcelo retorted, "but I don't need some washed-up boxer undermining my authority." Lucas's expression hardened slightly. "Careful, Marcelo. Jeremiah has shown nothing but respect. Perhaps it's time you did the same." Marcelo's eyes flashed with anger, but he bit back a sharp reply. Instead, he turned on his heel and left the office without another word. Outside, the night air was cool against his skin. Marcelo walked aimlessly for a while, his thoughts a turbulent mix of resentment and insecurity. He prided himself on being the best, but today's events had shaken that belief. Meanwhile, inside the gym, Jeremiah was tidying up when Derek approached him again. "Mind if I ask you something?" the young boxer said. "Go ahead," Jeremiah replied, organizing a rack of weights. "Why did you leave boxing? You were at the top of your game." Jeremiah paused, his gaze distant for a moment. "Sometimes success comes with a cost," he said quietly. "The higher I climbed, the more I felt disconnected from who I wanted to be." Derek frowned slightly. "I guess I never thought of it that way. It's easy to lose yourself when you're always in the spotlight," Jeremiah continued. "I needed to find peace, and for me, that meant stepping away." Derek nodded, thoughtfully. "But do you miss it?" "Parts of it," Jeremiah admitted. "The discipline, the challenge, the purity of the sport that I miss. But the rest? No, I don't miss that." "Well, I'm glad you're here now," Derek said earnestly. "We could all learn a lot from you." Jeremiah smiled softly. "Thank you, Derek. I'm happy to help where I can." As the evening drew to a close, Jeremiah locked up the gym, the events of the day weighing on his mind. He knew that his decision to step into the ring even briefly would have consequences. The quiet life he had cultivated was changing, and he wasn't sure how he felt about it. The next day, the gym was abuzz with renewed energy. Fighters arrived earlier than usual, eager to train and hopeful for a chance to work with Jeremiah. He obliged, offering guidance and demonstrating techniques with patience and clarity. Marcelo arrived to find his usual group of students gathered around Jeremiah. Frustration simmered beneath his composed exterior as he watched from a distance. During a brief lull, Marcelo approached Jeremiah. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone clipped. "Of course," Jeremiah replied calmly. They stepped aside to a quieter corner of the gym. Marcelo crossed his arms. "I don't appreciate you stepping on my toes," he said bluntly. Jeremiah met his gaze steadily. "I'm not trying to interfere. The fighters asked for my help." "You're undermining my authority," Marcelo insisted. "They were my students." "They still are," Jeremiah assured him. "I'm just offering a different perspective." Marcelo shook his head. "I don't need you here. The gym doesn't need you." Jeremiah considered his words carefully. "Marcelo, this isn't about you or me. It's about helping them become better fighters." "Easy for you to say," Marcelo snapped. "You had your glory. Don't try to take mine." Jeremiah sighed softly. "I'm not here to take anything from you. Perhaps we could work together." "Work together?" Marcelo echoed with a bitter laugh. "I don't think so." Before Jeremiah could respond, Lucas joined them. "Is everything all right here?" Marcelo turned away. "Fine," he muttered before walking off. Lucas watched him go, concern etched on his face. "He'll come around," he said to Jeremiah. "I hope so," Jeremiah replied. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not," Lucas assured him. "Sometimes change is hard for people. Give it time." Over the following days, the dynamic in the gym continued to evolve. Marcelo kept his distance, focusing on his remaining students, while Jeremiah's influence grew. The fighters appreciated his humble approach and the wealth of knowledge he shared. One afternoon, as Jeremiah was demonstrating footwork to a group, he noticed Marcelo watching from across the gym. Their eyes met briefly before Marcelo looked away. There was a flicker of something in his expression, perhaps regret or maybe envy. That evening, as the gym emptied out, Marcelo approached Jeremiah once more. "I wanted to apologize," he said grudgingly. Jeremiah was slightly surprised. "You don't need to apologize." "Yes, I do," Marcelo insisted. "I've been unprofessional. I let my ego get in the way." Jeremiah nodded slowly. "We all have our moments. It's not easy when things change unexpectedly." Marcelo shifted uncomfortably. "I guess I was threatened by you. You've accomplished so much, and I felt overshadowed." "It's not a competition," Jeremiah said gently. "We both have something to offer." Marcelo managed a faint smile. "Maybe we can start over?" "I'd like that," Jeremiah agreed. They shook hands, a silent agreement to move forward without animosity. As they parted ways, a sense of harmony began to settle over the gym. The fighters noticed the change, and the environment became more collaborative. Marcelo and Jeremiah started co-training sessions, combining their strengths for the benefit of everyone. Derek observed the newfound cooperation with satisfaction. "Looks like things are finally coming together," he remarked to Lucas. "Indeed," Lucas replied with a smile. "Sometimes, it just takes a catalyst to bring out the best in people." Jeremiah, now more integrated into the gym's community, felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected. By embracing his past rather than hiding from it, he found a way to contribute meaningfully without sacrificing his peace. The revelation of his identity had been a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone around him. Respect had been redefined, not as something demanded through authority, but as something earned through humility, understanding, and mutual support. As the sun set on another day, casting warm hues across the gym floor, Jeremiah looked around with a contented heart. He had come full circle, finding balance between who he had been and who he wanted to be. The gym was electric with anticipation. Word had spread quickly about the unexpected sparring match between Marcelo and Jeremiah. Fighters who weren't present earlier had rushed back, eager to witness the unfolding events. The atmosphere was thick with a mix of excitement and disbelief. The revelation that their quiet janitor was none other than Jeremiah, the Hurricane Carter former world champion, had everyone buzzing. Marcelo stood in the ring, his pride wounded but not yet broken. He paced back and forth, trying to mask his unease with bravado. "All right, old man," he called out, his voice echoing through the gym. "Now that we all know who you are, let's see if you've still got what it takes." Jeremiah climbed back into the ring, his movements fluid and unhurried. The murmurs of the crowd hushed as he took his stance. Unlike before, there was a newfound respect in the eyes of the onlookers. They watched closely, sensing that this was more than just a simple sparring session. It was a clash of pride and humility. Marcelo raised his gloves, his jaw set. "No more games," he muttered. "Show me what you've got." Jeremiah nodded subtly, his expression calm. "As you wish." The makeshift bell sounded, a tap on the metal railing, and the round began. Marcelo moved first, launching a swift combination aimed at testing Jeremiah's defenses. His punches were sharp, honed by years of training, but Jeremiah anticipated each one. He parried and slipped effortlessly, his eyes never leaving Marcelo's. Frustration flashed across Marcelo's face. He increased his tempo, throwing hooks and jabs with greater intensity. But Jeremiah remained a step ahead, his footwork impeccable. He moved with a grace that belied his age, conserving energy while expertly navigating the ring. "Come on," Marcelo growled, pushing forward aggressively. "Fight me!" Jeremiah finally went on the offensive. He delivered a quick jab that connected with Marcelo's guard, followed by a feint that caused Marcelo to overcommit. Seizing the opening, Jeremiah landed a light tap to Marcelo's side, a reminder of his superior skill rather than an attempt to cause harm. The crowd reacted with a mix of gasps and cheers. They could see the clear difference in experience and technique. Marcelo was fighting with emotion, his movements becoming increasingly erratic, while Jeremiah remained composed, every action deliberate. "He's toying with him," someone whispered. "Look at that control," another replied. Marcelo's frustration boiled over. Abandoning strategy, he swung wildly, aiming a powerful right hook at Jeremiah's head. Jeremiah ducked smoothly, countering with a swift uppercut that stopped just short of Marcelo's chin. The message was clear. Jeremiah could have ended the match if he wanted to. Breathing heavily, Marcelo staggered back. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and his eyes were filled with a mix of anger and desperation. "Why won't you fight me seriously?" he shouted. Jeremiah lowered his gloves slightly. "Because this isn't about winning or losing," he said evenly. "It's about respect. Don't patronize me." Marcelo snapped, lunging forward once more. Jeremiah sidestepped, placing a firm hand on Marcelo's shoulder to halt his momentum. "Enough," he said firmly. "You're only hurting yourself." Marcelo shoved his hand away. "I don't need your pity." The tension in the gym was palpable. Lucas stepped forward, concern etched on his face. "Maybe we should call it," he suggested. But Marcelo shook his head vehemently. "No, I can do this." Jeremiah sighed softly. "Very well, if you insist." This time, when Marcelo attacked, Jeremiah met him head-on. Their gloves collided as they exchanged a series of blows. Marcelo put all his strength into his punches, but Jeremiah matched him effortlessly, blocking and countering with precision. The difference in their skill levels became even more apparent. As the bout continued, Marcelo's movements grew sluggish. Fatigue set in, and his form began to falter. Jeremiah, noticing his opponent's exhaustion, decided it was time to end the fight. He delivered a rapid combination, jab, cross, hook, that bypassed Marcelo's defenses and tapped him lightly on the temple. Marcelo stumbled, his legs giving way as he fell to one knee. The gym fell silent. Jeremiah stepped back, giving Marcelo space. "Are you all right?" he asked calmly. Breathing heavily, Marcelo looked up, his eyes glistening not with anger, but with the realization of his own limitations. How are you doing this?" he whispered. Jeremiah extended a hand. "Years of practice, discipline, and respect for both the sport and my opponents." Marcelo hesitated before accepting the help. As Jeremiah pulled him to his feet, a ripple of applause spread through the gym. It started with Derek, and soon encompassed everyone present. The clapping wasn't just for Jeremiah's skill, but also for the sportsmanship he displayed. Marcelo stood unsteadily, his pride humbled. "I didn't understand," he admitted quietly. "I thought I knew everything." Jeremiah nodded. "We all have more to learn. Pride can blind us to the truth." Lucas stepped into the ring, placing a supportive hand on Marcelo's shoulder. "You fought well," he said kindly, "but there's always room to grow." Marcelo glanced around at the faces of his students, their expressions a mix of concern and admiration. He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice carrying across the gym. "I've let my arrogance get the better of me." Jeremiah gave a reassuring smile. Acknowledging it is the first step. The tension eased, replaced by a sense of unity. The fighters gathered around the ring, some offering words of encouragement to Marcelo, others expressing their newfound respect for Jeremiah. Derek spoke up, his eyes bright. "Maybe now we can all learn from each other." A chorus of agreement followed. The atmosphere shifted toward one of collaboration rather than competition. Over the next few days, the gym transformed. Marcelo and Jeremiah began working together, combining their expertise to train the fighters. Marcelo's approach softened as he opened himself up to learning from Jeremiah. In turn, Jeremiah shared his knowledge generously, appreciating the opportunity to mentor without the pressures of his past. One afternoon, as the two men supervised a sparring session, Marcelo turned to Jeremiah. "I want to thank you," he said earnestly. "For what?" Jeremiah asked, glancing over. "For teaching me." "Both in and out of the ring," Marcelo replied. "I had forgotten why I started boxing in the first place. It wasn't about ego or dominance. It was about the love of the sport." Jeremiah nodded, thoughtfully. "It's easy to lose sight of that. I'm glad you've rediscovered it." Marcelo smiled. "I have you to thank for that." Their partnership set a positive example for everyone at the gym. The fighters flourished under their combined guidance, improving not just their physical skills, but also their understanding of what it meant to be a true athlete. One evening, after a particularly productive training session, Lucas gathered everyone together. "I just want to say how proud I am of all of you," he announced. "The progress I've seen lately is remarkable, not just in technique, but in character." He looked pointedly at Marcelo and Jeremiah. "These two have shown us that strength isn't just about how hard you can hit, but how open you are to growth and cooperation." Applause filled the gym, the sense of camaraderie stronger than ever. As the crowd dispersed, Derek approached Jeremiah. When you first stepped into the ring, I thought it was just about putting Marcelo in his place," he admitted. Jeremiah chuckled softly. "It was never about that." "I see that now," Derek continued. "You've taught us all so much. Remember, the greatest victories are the ones we achieve over ourselves," Jeremiah said. "Keep that in mind as you continue your journey." Derek nodded appreciatively. "I will." Later that night, as the gym emptied and the quiet settled in, Jeremiah took a moment to reflect. He walked over to one of the heavy bags, placing a hand on its worn surface. The echoes of the day's activities lingered in the air. Marcelo approached, carrying a pair of gloves. "Care for a few rounds?" he asked with a grin. Jeremiah raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready for that?" "Not for a match," Marcelo clarified. "Just some practice. Thought we could keep each other sharp." A smile spread across Jeremiah's face. "I'd like that." They began working the bag side by side, the rhythmic sounds of their punches creating a harmonious beat. No words were needed. The mutual respect between them spoke volumes. As they wrapped up, Marcelo turned to Jeremiah. "I think the gym is a better place now." "I agree," Jeremiah replied. "It's amazing what can happen when we let go of our egos." Marcelo extended his hand. "Partners," Jeremiah shook his hand firmly. "Partners." The two men left the gym together, the night air cool against their skin. The streets were quiet, the city lights casting a gentle glow. There was a sense of closure, but also the promise of new beginnings. For Jeremiah, the journey back into the world he had left behind was unexpected but welcome. He had found a way to honor his past while embracing the present. The respect he had earned was not just from his skill but from the humility and integrity he displayed. As they parted ways, Marcelo looked back. "See you tomorrow?" "Bright and early," Jeremiah confirmed. Walking home, Jeremiah felt at peace. The fight for respect had not been won with fists alone but with understanding and compassion. He had taught not just Marcelo, but everyone at the gym, that true strength comes from within. The path ahead was still unfolding, but Jeremiah was ready to face it, with gloves on and head held high. The gym was enveloped in a tense silence. The fluorescent lights cast a stark glow over the ring, where Marcelo and Jeremiah faced each other once more. This time, the atmosphere was different. The earlier revelations had stripped away any pretense. Marcelo's face was a mask of simmering rage, his eyes locked onto Jeremiah with a burning intensity. Around the ring, the crowd of fighters and trainers watched with bated breath. Whispers had ceased. All attention was focused on the two men preparing to clash. Derek stood near the front, his hands clenched tightly. He could sense that this confrontation would be decisive. Marcelo bounced on the balls of his feet, shaking out his arms. "No more holding back," he snarled. "I want you at your best." Jeremiah adjusted his gloves calmly. "As you wish," he replied softly. His demeanor remained composed, but there was a steely resolve in his gaze. The makeshift bell sounded, and the final confrontation began. Marcelo lunged forward with explosive speed, launching a barrage of punches aimed at overwhelming Jeremiah. Left hook, right cross, uppercut, his fists flew with ferocity. But Jeremiah's responses were swift and precise. He blocked and parried each attack, his movements economical and efficient. The spectators could hardly believe what they were seeing. Marcelo was unleashing his full power, but Jeremiah seemed untouchable. His footwork was impeccable, gliding effortlessly around the ring, his eyes never leaving his opponent. "Come on!" Marcelo shouted, frustration seeping into his voice. He threw a heavy right hook, putting all his weight behind it. Jeremiah ducked smoothly, causing Marcelo to stumble forward. Seizing the moment, Jeremiah delivered a light tap to Marcelo's shoulder, a reminder of his presence rather than a damaging blow. Marcelo spun around, teeth gritted. "Fight me seriously," he demanded. Jeremiah met his gaze. "Aggression without control is pointless," he said evenly. "You're wasting energy." Enraged by what he perceived as condescension, Marcelo charged again. This time, his attacks were wilder, less disciplined. Jeremiah recognized the signs. Marcelo was losing control, letting his emotions override his training. As Marcelo swung wide, Jeremiah sidestepped and landed a gentle jab to Marcelo's midsection. It was enough to hurt him, but it disrupted his rhythm. Marcelo growled in frustration. "Focus," Jeremiah advised. "Center yourself. Don't tell me what to do." Marcelo retorted, launching another assault. The pattern continued, Marcelo attacking furiously, Jeremiah defending with ease. The disparity in their skill levels became increasingly apparent. Marcelo's punches grew slower, his breathing heavier. Sweat poured down his face, his muscles straining. Meanwhile, Jeremiah remained composed. His breathing was steady, his movements controlled. He wasn't taunting Marcelo. He was demonstrating the importance of discipline and strategy over sheer force. The crowd watched in awe. Some began to see Marcelo's struggle not just as a physical battle, but as an internal one. His pride and ego were clashing with the reality before him. Derek leaned toward Lucas. "He can't keep this up," he whispered. "Marcelo's exhausting himself." Lucas nodded solemnly. Jeremiah is teaching him a lesson in more ways than one. Back in the ring, Marcelo's attacks began to falter. His punches lost their power, his stance wavered. Sensing the shift, Jeremiah decided it was time to bring the confrontation to a close. When Marcelo swung a sluggish right hook, Jeremiah caught his wrist gently but firmly. "It's over," he said quietly. Marcelo tried to pull away, but his strength was depleted. "No, I can still." Jeremiah shook his head. "Pushing beyond your limits won't change the outcome. Accept it." For a moment, Marcelo stood there, breathing heavily, his arms still in Jeremiah's grasp. The weight of defeat settled on his shoulders. He looked around at the faces watching him, not with ridicule, but with concern and empathy. I don't understand," Marcelo murmured. "Why can't I beat you?" Jeremiah released his grip, placing a reassuring hand on Marcelo's shoulder. "Because you're fighting against yourself more than against me," he explained. "Your anger blinds you. Skill comes from the mind as much as the body." Marcelo's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove myself," he admitted. "I thought being the best meant being unbeatable." "Being the best is about more than victory," Jeremiah replied. "It's about honor, respect, and knowing your own strengths and weaknesses." A profound silence filled the gym. The fighters and trainers absorbed the weight of Jeremiah's words. Marcelo lowered his gaze. The fight drained out of him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything." Jeremiah offered a gentle smile. "We all have our journeys. What's important is that we learn from them. He extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Marcelo accepted it. The handshake was a symbol of reconciliation, a mutual understanding forged through conflict. Applause erupted around them, starting slowly but building in intensity. The tension that had gripped the gym dissipated, replaced by a sense of unity and relief. Lucas stepped into the ring, his expression one of pride. "Well done, both of you," he said. "This is what true sportsmanship looks like." Marcelo wiped his brow, a small smile forming. "Thank you," he said to Jeremiah, "for not humiliating me." "There's no honor in tearing someone down," Jeremiah replied. "We rise by lifting others." As they exited the ring, the fighters gathered around, offering words of support. Marcelo received pats on the back and encouraging nods. The atmosphere was no longer one of rivalry, but of camaraderie. Over the following days, the transformation within the gym was palpable. Marcelo embraced a new approach to training, focusing on discipline and respect. He sought Jeremiah's guidance, eager to improve not just as a coach, but as a person. Jeremiah, in turn, became an integral part of the gym community. He conducted training sessions, sharing his wealth of knowledge without reservation. His humility and kindness earned him the admiration of all. One afternoon, as the sun cast warm rays through the windows, Marcelo approached Jeremiah during a break. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Please," Jeremiah replied, gesturing to the bench beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Marcelo spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. That skill comes from the mind as much as the body." Jeremiah nodded. "It's something many overlook. I realize now that I've been so focused on proving myself that I forgot why I love boxing," Marcelo admitted. "The discipline, the art of it, that's what drew me in." "It's never too late to reconnect with that," Jeremiah encouraged. Marcelo smiled appreciatively. "You've helped me see that. I want to be better, not just for myself, but for my students." "You're already on that path," Jeremiah assured him. "Acknowledging the need to grow is a significant step." Marcelo glanced around the gym, watching the fighters train with renewed enthusiasm. "They look up to you, you know?" "And to you," Jeremiah countered. "We each have our roles to play." Marcelo chuckled softly. "I suppose we make a good team." "Agreed." As the weeks passed, the gym flourished under their combined leadership. The fighters progressed rapidly, benefiting from the blend of Marcelo's technical expertise and Jeremiah's strategic insight. One evening, after an intense training session, Derek gathered the fighters together. "I think I speak for everyone when I say that this place feels different in the best way possible," he declared. Cheers and nods of agreement followed. "We owe a lot to Marcelo and Jeremiah," Derek continued. "Their partnership has made us all better." Marcelo felt a swell of pride and gratitude. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "But it's your hard work and dedication that make this gym what it is." Jeremiah stepped forward. "We're proud of each and every one of you. Remember, the strength of a fighter isn't just in the fists, but in the heart and mind." Applause filled the room, echoing off the walls. As the gym emptied out that night, Marcelo and Jeremiah remained behind, tidying up. The quiet was peaceful, a stark contrast to the tension of weeks prior. "Funny how things turn out," Marcelo mused. "Life has a way of surprising us," Jeremiah agreed. Marcelo leaned against the ring ropes. "I never imagined I'd find a mentor in you." Jeremiah smiled. "And I didn't expect to find a partner in you." They shared a moment of mutual respect and understanding. "What's next for you?" Marcelo asked. Jeremiah considered the question. "For now, I'm content here, helping where I can." "We're lucky to have you," Marcelo said earnestly. "I'm fortunate to be part of this community," Jeremiah replied. As they locked up and stepped into the cool night air, Marcelo looked up at the stars. "Feels like a new beginning?" Jeremiah followed his gaze. "It does." They parted ways at the corner, each heading toward their respective homes. The streets were quiet, the city's heartbeat a distant hum. Jeremiah walked with a lightness in his step. The journey he had embarked upon, one of humility, confrontation, and reconciliation, had led him to a place of fulfillment. He had rediscovered a sense of purpose, not through fame or accolades, but through meaningful connections and the sharing of wisdom. The final confrontation had not been about defeating an opponent, but overcoming barriers of pride, misunderstanding, and fear. In doing so, both he and Marcelo had grown, setting an example for others to follow. As Jeremiah approached his home, he paused to take in the serene surroundings. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the street. He breathed deeply, a contented smile gracing his features. He was right where he needed to be. The days following the final confrontation marked a turning point for the gym and everyone in it. News of the epic showdown between Jeremiah and Marcelo spread quickly, not just among the regulars but throughout the local boxing community. The gym, once just another training facility, had become a place of renewed energy and purpose. Jeremiah arrived early one morning, as was his habit, to find a group of fighters already waiting outside. They greeted him with warm smiles and respectful nods. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," one of them said. "We were hoping you'd show us some techniques before class starts." He was taken aback by the formality. "Please call me Jeremiah," he replied kindly. "I'd be happy to help." As they entered the gym together, Jeremiah felt a shift in the atmosphere. The invisible barrier that had once separated him from the others had dissolved. No longer was he just the janitor, he was a mentor, a source of wisdom and experience. Throughout the morning, fighters approached him with questions, seeking advice on everything from footwork to mental preparation. Jeremiah offered guidance patiently, his teaching style gentle yet effective. He emphasized the importance of discipline, respect, and self-awareness, principles that extended beyond the ring. Marcelo watched from a distance, a contemplative expression on his face. He had undergone his own transformation since the fight. The humility he gained had opened his eyes to the flaws in his previous approach. No longer driven by ego, he began to reassess his methods and priorities. Later that day, Marcelo approached Jeremiah during a break. "You've made quite an impact," he remarked, not with jealousy, but with genuine appreciation. Jeremiah smiled modestly. "I'm just sharing what I know. They have a lot of potential." "They do," Marcelo agreed. "And I think together, we can help them reach it." Jeremiah nodded. "I was thinking the same." They decided to collaborate more closely, combining their strengths to create a comprehensive training program. Marcelo's technical expertise and familiarity with the fighters complemented Jeremiah's strategic insights and emphasis on mental fortitude. Word of their partnership spread, attracting new members to the gym. Fighters from other facilities came to train, eager to learn from the renowned Jeremiah Carter and the rejuvenated Marcelo. The gym flourished, becoming a hub of excellence and camaraderie. One afternoon, as the gym buzzed with activity, Lucas gathered everyone around. "I want to acknowledge the incredible progress we've made," he announced. "This place has become more than just a gym, it's a community." He turned to Jeremiah and Marcelo. "These two have shown us what true leadership and cooperation look like. Let's give them a round of applause." The room erupted in cheers and clapping. Jeremiah felt a warmth spread through him, grateful for the acceptance and appreciation. As the applause subsided, Marcelo stepped forward. "I also want to say something," he began. "A few weeks ago, I let my pride get in the way. I was so focused on being the best that I forgot what truly matters. But thanks to Jeremiah and all of you, I've learned that we're stronger together." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his students. "I'm committed to being the best coach I can be, not for my own ego, but to help each of you achieve your goals." More applause followed, along with supportive shouts. The sense of unity was palpable. Over the next few weeks, the gym's atmosphere continued to thrive. Fighters pushed themselves harder, not out of competition with one another, but out of a shared desire for self-improvement. They supported each other, celebrating successes and encouraging perseverance through challenges. Jeremiah found deep fulfillment in his new role. He had avoided the spotlight for so long, fearing it would consume him as it had in the past. But here, he discovered that he could contribute meaningfully without losing himself. One evening after a long day of training, Derek approached him. "Jeremiah, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Jeremiah replied, wiping down a bench. "How did you handle it back then? The fame, the pressure?" Derek asked earnestly. "I'm starting to get attention in the amateur circuit, and it's a lot." Jeremiah sat down, gesturing for Derek to join him. "It's important to stay grounded," he advised. "Remember why you started boxing in the first place. Hold onto your values and surround yourself with people who support you for who you are, not just for your achievements." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. It's easy to get caught up in it all." "It is," Jeremiah agreed. "But success without integrity isn't true success." "Thanks," Derek said sincerely. "I appreciate your wisdom." "Anytime," Jeremiah replied with a warm smile. Meanwhile, Marcelo was having a similar conversation with another fighter struggling with self-doubt. His newfound empathy allowed him to connect with his students on a deeper level. He shared his own experiences openly, creating an environment where vulnerability was not seen as weakness, but as a step toward growth. Lucas observed these interactions with satisfaction. The gym had become everything he had hoped for, a place where skills were honed and character was built. One day, Lucas called a meeting with Jeremiah and Marcelo. "I've been thinking," he began. "I'd like to officially make you both co-head coaches of the gym." Marcelo raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Are you sure? I thought you preferred having a single head coach." "I was hesitant before," Lucas admitted. "But seeing how well you two work together, I believe this is the best direction for us." Jeremiah considered the offer. "I appreciate the trust, but I want to make sure this is what everyone wants." Marcelo grinned. "I think it's a great idea. We make a good team." "Then it's settled," Lucas said, clapping his hands together. "Let's continue building on this momentum." The announcement was met with enthusiasm from the fighters. The co-head coaches embraced their roles, each bringing unique perspectives that enriched the training experience. As time passed, the gym's reputation grew. They hosted successful tournaments, produced champions, and became a pillar of the community. But more importantly, they fostered an environment where respect, humility, and mutual support were paramount. One evening, as the sun cast golden hues through the gym windows, Jeremiah stood watching a group of young fighters practice. He felt a deep sense of contentment. This was where he was meant to be, not hiding from his past, but using it to inspire and guide others. Marcelo joined him, following his gaze. "They're coming along nicely," he remarked. "They are," Jeremiah agreed. "It's rewarding to see them grow." "Funny how things turned out," Marcelo mused. "A few months ago, I couldn't have imagined we'd be here." "Life has its surprises," Jeremiah said with a chuckle. Marcelo turned to him. "I want you to know how much I've learned from you, not just about boxing, but about being a better person." "That means a lot," Jeremiah replied sincerely. "And I've learned from you as well. Your passion and dedication are inspiring." They shook hands, a gesture that had come to symbolize their partnership and friendship. As the fighters began to pack up for the night, Derek approached them. "A few of us are grabbing dinner. Care to join?" Marcelo glanced at Jeremiah, who nodded. "Sounds good," Marcelo said. "Let's go." They headed out together, a diverse group bound by shared experiences and mutual respect. Laughter and conversation flowed easily, the camaraderie extending beyond the gym walls. At the restaurant, stories were exchanged and dreams were shared. Jeremiah listened attentively, offering insights when asked but mostly enjoying the sense of belonging. Derek raised his glass to Jeremiah and Marcelo for being more than coaches, for being mentors and friends. "Hear, hear," the group echoed, clinking their glasses together. Jeremiah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the food or drink. It was the warmth of connection, of having made a difference. Later that night, as he walked home under a canopy of stars, Jeremiah reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The challenges, the confrontations, the revelations, all had led to growth and understanding. He had learned that hiding from his past was not the answer. By embracing who he was and sharing his experiences, he found healing and purpose. The respect he received was not demanded but earned through authenticity and kindness. The gym had become more than a place of work. It was a family. Together, they faced challenges, celebrated victories, and supported one another through setbacks. Jeremiah looked up at the sky, a contented smile on his face. The path ahead was still unwritten, but he was no longer walking it alone. He was home. The gym settled into a comfortable rhythm in the weeks that followed. The initial excitement surrounding Jeremiah's emergence as a mentor had mellowed into a deep-rooted respect. Fighters came and went, but the sense of community remained stronger than ever. The walls echoed with the sounds of gloves hitting bags, feet shuffling across mats, and voices encouraging one another. Jeremiah continued his role as the janitor, arriving early each morning to prepare the gym for the day ahead. He cleaned the equipment, tidied the locker rooms, and ensured that everything was in its place. Despite his newfound status, he preferred to keep his life simple. The humility that had always defined him remained unwavering. One morning, as he was mopping the entrance, Derek approached him with a grin. "You're here even before the sun, huh?" Jeremiah chuckled. "Old habits die hard. Besides, someone has to make sure this place doesn't fall apart." Derek leaned on a nearby wall. "You know, you don't have to do all this anymore. You've earned the right to take it easy." Jeremiah looked up, his eyes reflecting a gentle wisdom. "I find peace in the routine. It keeps me grounded." Derek nodded, thoughtfully. "I get that, but don't underestimate the impact you've had. People around here see things differently because of you." "How so?" Jeremiah asked, his curiosity piqued. "Well, for starters, the way we view respect and strength. It's not just about who can punch the hardest anymore. It's about character, discipline, the way we carry ourselves," Derek explained. "You've shown us that true power comes from within." Jeremiah smiled softly. "I'm glad to hear that. But remember, it's up to each of you to carry that forward." As the day progressed, Jeremiah observed the fighters during their training sessions. There was a noticeable shift in how they interacted. Sparring matches were intense, but respectful. Fighters helped each other improve, offering constructive feedback rather than boasting about their abilities. Marcelo had embraced this change wholeheartedly. He worked closely with the younger fighters, focusing not just on technique, but also on mindset. His relationship with Jeremiah had evolved into a genuine friendship, marked by mutual respect and shared purpose. One afternoon, Marcelo called for a break and gathered the fighters around. "All right, everyone take a knee," he instructed. The group formed a semicircle, their attention fully on him. "I want to talk about what it means to be a fighter," Marcelo began. "It's not just about winning matches or earning titles. It's about who you are outside the ring, the choices you make, how you treat others, the legacy you leave behind." He glanced over at Jeremiah, who stood quietly at the back. "We have a living example of that right here. Jeremiah has taught us that humility and integrity are just as important as strength and skill." The fighters turned to look at Jeremiah, their expressions reflecting admiration. One of them, a young woman named Sophia, raised her hand. "Jeremiah, would you share some of your experiences with us?" Jeremiah hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. "I've spent a lot of time reflecting on my journey," he began. "When I was your age, I was focused on becoming the best, pushing myself to the limits. But along the way, I lost sight of what truly mattered." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of success and forget why you started in the first place. For me, stepping away was a chance to reconnect with myself, to find balance." Sophia nodded. "How did you find that balance?" "By embracing simplicity and staying true to my values," Jeremiah replied. "I realized that true fulfillment comes not from external achievements, but from inner peace." Another fighter, Carlos, spoke up. "But isn't it important to have goals and strive for greatness?" "Absolutely," Jeremiah agreed. "Goals give us direction, and striving for greatness pushes us to grow. But it's important to ensure that your pursuit doesn't come at the expense of your integrity or well-being." Marcelo chimed in. "What Jeremiah is saying is that success is hollow if you sacrifice who you are to achieve it." The group absorbed these insights, the atmosphere thoughtful and introspective. After a moment, Marcelo clapped his hands. "All right, back to training." Remember, every punch, every step is an expression of who you are. As the fighters dispersed, Derek approached Jeremiah once more. "You have a way with words," he remarked. Jeremiah chuckled. "Just sharing what I've learned the hard way." "Do you ever miss it?" Derek asked. "The fame, the excitement?" Jeremiah considered the question. "Sometimes I miss the thrill of the fight, the feeling of testing my limits. But I don't miss the chaos that came with it. I found a different kind of fulfillment here." Derek smiled. "We're lucky to have you." "Thank you," Jeremiah said sincerely. "But remember, each of you has the potential to make a difference in your own lives and in the lives of others." Later that evening, as the gym began to empty, Jeremiah found himself alone. He walked around, turning off lights and tidying up. The quietness was comforting, a gentle end to a fulfilling day. He paused by the ring, running his hand along the rope. Memories of his past flickered through his mind, not with regret, but with appreciation for how far he'd come. The ring had once been his entire world, a place where he sought validation. Now it was a symbol of growth and the journey he had undertaken. Stepping outside, Jeremiah locked the doors and took a deep breath of the cool night air. The streets were calm, the distant sounds of the city a soothing backdrop. As he walked home, he reflected on the impact one person could have simply by being true to themselves. The next morning, he arrived at the gym to find a small gathering outside. Marcelo, Derek, Sophia, Carlos, and several other fighters stood waiting. "Good morning," Jeremiah greeted, surprised. "What's all this?" Marcelo stepped forward with a grin. "We wanted to show our appreciation." Sophia held out a wrap package. "It's a little something from all of us." Jeremiah accepted the gift, his eyes reflecting gratitude. "You didn't have to do this." "Open it," Derek urged. Carefully unwrapping the package, Jeremiah revealed a custom-made boxing robe. It was simple yet elegant, with his name embroidered on the back and the words "Legacy of Honor" beneath it. "We thought you might like to have this," Carlos said, "as a symbol of what you mean to us." Jeremiah was touched. "I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll wear it," Sophia laughed. He smiled warmly. "I will. Thank you, all of you." Marcelo placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've given us more than you know. Consider this a small token of our appreciation." Jeremiah nodded, emotions welling up. "I'm honored." The group shared a moment of camaraderie before heading inside to start the day's training. Jeremiah hung the robe in a place of honor, a reminder of the connections he had forged. As the weeks turned into months, the gym continued to thrive. Fighters competed and won championships. But more importantly, they carried themselves with the dignity and respect that Jeremiah had instilled in them. One day, Lucas approached Jeremiah with a proposition. "We've been invited to open a new training facility across town," he said. "I'd like you to lead it." Jeremiah considered the offer. "That's quite an opportunity." "It is," Lucas agreed. "But I understand if you'd prefer to stay here." Jeremiah thought for a moment. "Perhaps it's time to spread the lessons we've learned here. If we can create another place that fosters growth and integrity, it would be worthwhile." Lucas smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." And so, Jeremiah began a new chapter, bringing his philosophy to a wider audience. The legacy he built was not one of trophies or titles, but of lives touched and principles upheld. Back at the original gym, Marcelo and the fighters continued the work they had started together. The spirit of collaboration and mutual respect remained the cornerstone of their community. In quiet moments, Jeremiah reflected on the journey that had led him here. From a young champion seeking glory to a humble janitor rediscovering his purpose, every step had been a lesson. He understood now that true power wasn't about physical strength or public acclaim. It was about the courage to be authentic, the willingness to learn and grow, and the capacity to inspire others through actions rather than words. As he stood in the new facility, watching a fresh group of fighters begin their journey, Jeremiah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His legacy was alive, not in accolades, but in the hearts and minds of those he had touched. and that he knew was the greatest victory of all.
If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next stories that will be posted soon. Thanks for watching, folks. See you on the next video.